Okay, so welcome back to Tile Grid Maps. In today's video, I'm looking at setting the breakpoints for these different colors. I changed the color scheme from the last video and I also set it up. So I have two tile grid maps side by side and they're using the same color scale, the same breakpoints, because I have two different years, 2019 and 2020 for crude death rates. And I'm wanting to tell a certain kind of stories. What I'm showing here is what I actually used on the blog, which is the 25 to 30, 30 to 35, 35 to 40. And I have these set up here based off of, and you'll see down below. To remind you for these tile grid maps, these are set up in these squares. So I've set up the row heights and the column widths. These are set up with formatting so that there's special cell formatting on each of these cells so that instead of the numbers that are the value of the cells, you actually see the two-letter abbreviation for each of the states, plus Washington, D.C. So we see D.C. right there. So we get, first off, instead of the numerical value that's actually getting fed into there from a lookup elsewhere, and I have a separate tab where the values are all stored. So I'm going to go equal to that. So I'm seeing DC, SC, and all of that. And then I have conditional formatting based on that value. And that conditional formatting, so I'm going to go show you that. So I open the home ribbon, conditional formatting. I want to, let's just say, manage the rules. And you can see I have it on one of the squares, and I have these on all of the squares that have colors. I have these different rules. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have these 5 rules. And then I also have a rule for no value or blank value. And it, makes sure that that is white. And so I have the background color and the font color set a certain way depending on the cell value. And the cell value is based on some stuff that's off the screen right now. And I'm going to show you, those are where our breakpoints are. And so today I'm talking about how do we decide where to put those breakpoints, because it's going to look very different depending on where we put these. So I have 25, 30, 35, 40 currently. And I'll talk about where I got those choices. Well, I actually have some things down here to help me decide. Here's some formulas that just do some count ifs to give me the cumulative count of those that are going to be under these different breakpoints. Then I know how many of each color. So for 2019 and 2020, there's 21 at the lightest color for 2019 and 11 at the lightest color for 2020. So I can kind of see what the distribution looks like. And so that's very different. And maybe, I want different distributions. Well, what's over here on the right is I'm looking at what's the minimum number for each of these. So the minimums are different. Obviously, I've got about 13 and 17 here, and the maximums are different. And then I have the 20th, 40th, 60th, and 80th percentiles. So if I wanted to get like a fifth, a fifth, a fifth, a fifth, I'd set it at these percentiles to get about a fifth. So, why don't we do something like that? Let me look at the percentiles from 2019. Now I'm just going to use whole numbers to make things simple. So the 20th percentile at 2019 is at about 19. The next one is at about 25. Ooh, you can see this is already going to be very different. 30, and then about 37. So you can see it's more evenly distributed among the states. And we're going to scroll up in a moment to see what this looks like. So we've got 9, 12. We can't get it exactly, just the distribution is not going to be 10, 10, and 10. So it's evenly distributed for 2019. But for 2020, it looks very different. Only one state or locality is going to have that lightest color, then 10, then 7, 16, and 17. So this is going to look very different from what we had before. In terms of concentration. So now we have something that's a lot darker on the right side. Okay, and then I move over to the left side, and that looks really bad. So this is really going to emphasize like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. If you think dark is bad, and of course it is. Now, I didn't want to overemphasize that, you know, oh, this is awful, this is getting bad. I wanted it to be balanced. So when I was looking at where I wanted to put my breakpoints, I didn't want to have, you know, such an extreme distribution in 2020. The other thing was I wasn't just doing it for like these two tile grid maps. I was also doing it for the age adjusted death rate, and they were also in about the same ranges. So I was actually looking at 4 maps simultaneously and trying to balance all 4 using the same scale for all 4. And I also had some other things in mind while I was doing this. So that's one extreme. What if I used the percentiles for 2020? So for 2020, and this is not exactly, you can see I don't have the numbers aligned in my formatting so much. So I'm going to change these. So now I'll do 24. This is about 31. This is about 37. And then this is 44. So now I'm looking at 2019 is going to be very skewed on the light side. 19 states being the lightest color, and then 14 being the second lightest. Only 3 states are going to be at the darkest color, and then 7. So this is going to look very light, and then when we get over to 2020, this isn't evenly distributed because of how the breakpoints, and I'm not doing the decimals. It's not very, 9 and 8. That's not too bad. It's not 10 and 10. And there's actually 51 things because I have DC in here. So when I look at this, okay, so I've got a lot of light over here. So we see a lot of light. Then, like Rhode Island and Vermont are kind of darker. I see Wyoming, New Mexico, and Alaska as my dark states over here. And then when I go over to 2020, it kind of looks like what my original 2019 looked like, which this corridor of death. So, this is kind of a balancing act. There is an aesthetic going on here. It does kind of have to do with the narrative. In general, when I'm doing this, and if it's just one graph standing alone, often I will pick breakpoints that are based on the percentiles. Sometimes, if it makes sense, I will pick breakpoints that are evenly distributed along a scale. This is like making a histogram, okay, if you're used to making histograms. But you can, it's arbitrary. You can make it whatever you want. I'm going to show you something that if you have 2 tile grid maps that you're trying to use the same scale and you're wanting to be fair between both of them, why not take an average between the 2 percentiles? So I'm going to take an average across these 2, do it as a formula, and just, do it across like that. Now when I look, okay, 2019 is a little lighter, and the whole point of my blog post originally was that it got worse in 2020. This has been, if you've been reading my blog, if you're not one of my blog readers and you came here because you just wanted to know about tile grid maps, that's fine. But my whole point was that it got worse. This is something that got worse from 2019 to 2020. I want you to visually see the map get darker. Okay. And so you can see it's going to be skewed light in 2019, and then it skews darker in 2020. Let's take a look. And that's exactly what you see. You'll also see this is not exactly at the breakpoints I had before, which were like 25, 30, 35, 40, but it's not too far off from where I had breakpoints before. That top breakpoint is at 40.2, very close to the 40 I had before. The next breakpoint is at 33.2, not too far off from 35. The next one down is 28, which is not that far from 30, so not too bad. This is a way that I'm not having to, actually make a choice myself. But the point is, you do have to pick your breakpoints for this kind of graph. Sometimes there are natural places to pick these breakpoints, but often you really just have to look at the data that you're graphing. How is it distributed? I like picking the percentiles. I think it's easier for people to make comparisons if it's these nice round numbers and you're using, regular. I actually originally tried 20, 25, 30, 35, but that was way too dark to begin with, so I shifted it up by 5. I thought this looked good enough for what I wanted to demonstrate in terms of, yes, we got the corridor of death, and then it expanded in 2020. And then you can kind of see these corners, Wisconsin, West Virginia, Rhode Island. So these somewhat dark squares got darker in 2019, got darker in 2020. And so you can kind of see how things got darker without starting out too dark. So that was how I picked it. But there's a lot of legitimate choices you can make here. Just know that you consciously do have to make a choice. Too often in working with Excel and data visualization, we are used to using one of their charts that are built in. Nothing wrong with that. But when you're doing stuff with states and you're trying to compare states, the tile grid maps are really good. Don't use the map charts, because very rarely do you really want something that is based on geography directly. Montana is geographically huge, no matter what kind of map projection you use. Don't blame Mercator that projections that Montana is huge. It is physically huge. So is Alaska. Almost nobody lives there. Nobody cares. Texas is huge, and a lot of people live there. Great. California is huge. A lot of people live there. But then you have small states like Rhode Island and Connecticut. They have a decent number of people there, but you can barely see them in a map chart. They can be important states. When you do a tile grid map, you can see each of the states. They're only approximately located. So sometimes you do have to hunt around. Yes, I know DC is not east of South Carolina. Don't bitch at me. And North Carolina is not to the west of South Carolina. Not like that at any rate. Yeah, it's difficult, okay? Turning everything into a square, things get moved around. It doesn't work. There are different tile grid maps one can use, and it's such a pain to move the states around into a different configuration. And I had one with New York City. I moved Rhode Island up here, and then New York City where Rhode Island was. In any case, I just keep using the same tile grid maps over and over again. So yes, a lot of them are going to be not in geographic relationship that's quite right. So having a tile grid map is great. Be mindful of your breakpoints. Make it meaningful. Make it easy for the viewer to understand what's going on. So enjoy, and I'll put a link in the video description so you can have this file and play with it yourself. And I'll label this so that you can see this. These are the numbers to change. Don't change 0. Okay, I'll do that. But you can change the 25, 30, 35, 40 to whatever. Just, you shouldn't go below 17, and you shouldn't go below 12.9. You shouldn't go above 73.9, because then, you won't get anything in the lowest or the highest bin. That's all. Okay, enjoy.